You are listening to a TechSide Network podcast, TechSide.net, casual conversation from technically passionate people.
This is Americanitis, episode 17 for April 25th, 2020. I'm your host, Daniel Sagner. This podcast contains harsh language and covers adult topics. You'll be challenged by views with which you do not agree. We may not be politically correct, but we are correct about politics. I know all anyone wants to talk about is the coronavirus, but damn it, you have to be vigilant on all sides these days. They're coming for your rights, left, right, and center, and you have to call them all out on it. So instead of talking about the immediate effects of the virus, here's a story about the more ancillary consequences. You see, I was having a nice night. I was all ready to go to bed, and I made a large mistake. I opened the Twitter app to entertain myself and maybe get a few ideas for this podcast. What an idiot. Here I was thinking that a 7th Corona-sode was one too many, but then, what else is there to talk about? Be careful what you wish for. What I saw got me from 0 to 60 in record time. What I saw was a philosopher king telling me that my rights are null and void, an outdated notion. What I saw was a small-minded, ignorant, power-lusting imbecile demanding that the state's guns be used to forcibly extract my children from my arms and to feed their minds whatever backward, mind-destroying drivel they decree to be good enough. Do you think I'm being melodramatic? Do you think that I'm out of my mind? Well, I am very nearly out of my mind, but don't misunderstand me. First, you must be subjected to this cretin's voice as I was. Listen not to the slimy drops of white-hot malevolence dropping from his flaccid lips. Listen not to the tone which he bellows all the way down from his ivory tower where he sits and smirks about how much better he is than you. No. The job I have for you is much worse. Listen to his words. Understand them for what they mean. Extrapolate the exercise of power, of physical force against your children that this represents and promises.
The state needs to be the ultimate guarantor of a child's well-being. There's just no alternative to that. The reason parent-child relationships exist is because the state confers legal parenthood on people through its paternity and maternity laws. It's the state that is empowering parents to do anything with children, to take them home, to have custody, and to make any kind of decisions about that.
Do you feel it? That burning in your chest, the pressure behind the ears at the base of your skull, the quickening of your heart. That is what we call righteous fury. That's the feeling that gears you up for war. The feeling that you are ready to push and break through any boundary and kill any person who stands between you and yours. It is good that you feel that. It is right. It is just. What I ask of you is not to ignore that feeling, but to better understand it. Don't let it cloud your judgment, but rather allow it to sharpen your focus. So, who is this man who claims that your children are only yours because the state allows it? Is this some loon bag or drunk that the media found down an alley? Is this a recording by an actor reading lines for the latest Stalin documentary? No. This is James Dwyer. He is a full-time professor of law in the second oldest higher learning facility in the nation, the College of William and Mary. He holds a PhD from Stanford University, a JD from Yale, and a BA from Boston College. But, of course he does. You can't have your mind this broken without a good postmodern education. His claims are obviously false. I don't need to tell you that, but what I do want to clarify is why little Jimmy Dwyer is wrong, and what reality tells us is correct. Let's step through his statement one sentence at a time. He claims that, quote, the state needs to be the ultimate guarantor of a child's well-being. There's just no alternative to that. While yes, there is Jimbo, the fact that parents guaranteed the safety and well-being of their offspring for millennia seems to be lost on this knucklehead. Believe it or not, families predate even the concept of government. I know, crazy, right? Let's take the next one. Quote, "The reason parent-child relationships exist is because the state confers legal parenthood on people with paternity and maternity laws," unquote. Again, no. This guy clearly thinks that the state is some ever-present super being, a god that deigns to allow you to have a relationship with your child. But what is the state, really? It's just a collection of individuals performing the functions of a government. What gives them more right to your children than you have? No answer is given. Next. Quote, "It is the state that's empowering parents to do anything with children, to take them home, to have custody, and to make any kind of decisions about that," unquote. This is the most disgusting one because it fully reveals this monster's soul. He fully believes that we act by permission of the state. We exist at the state's pleasure. The individual is nothing, just a cog in the machine, easily replaced. The state is paramount to Professor St. Petersburg over here. All glory to the state. And just in case you are concerned that this is some cleverly edited clip that takes him out of context, you are in luck. He's published many papers on these very subjects. You can read one yourself, link in the show notes, if you wish to injure yourself mentally and spiritually. Now, you'd be forgiven for believing that this was some weird fringe case, so I hope you'll forgive me for disabusing you of that notion. The commies are all over the education scene, and they're coming for your kids.
We have never invested as much in public education as we should have because we've always had kind of a private notion of children. Your kid is yours and totally your responsibility. We haven't had a very collective notion of these are our children. So part of it is we have to break through our kind of private idea that kids belong to their parents or kids belong to their families and recognize that kids belong to whole communities. Once it's everybody's responsibility and not just the households, then we start making better investments.
Speaking was Melissa Harris Perry. I don't blame you for not knowing her. Her career with MSNBC was as troubled and short as the hyphen in her last name. Oh, and surprise, she doesn't pay her taxes. A lien to the tune of $70,000 was placed on her by the IRS. Now, you can imagine, I'm no fan of the IRS. I don't think anyone should be paying taxes, so why do I care? What I'm really pointing out here is the incredible hypocrisy of this woman claiming that it takes a village and then refusing to fund that village. But I suppose internal consistency may be lost on those who see no problem removing my child from my arms by force because I don't teach him the way they like. Everyone likes to draw parallels to 1984, but these people read Aldous Huxley like it was a to-do list. Why am I talking about this now? Why not bottle up this ire and spew it forth post-COVID? Because the recent job loss mixed with the lockdowns and school closures has had an interesting effect. Many parents are trying homeschooling. This makes our philosopher kings very, very nervous. They are quaking in their boots, and so they should be. Many parents are finding that they enjoy teaching their children, that their student is suddenly excelling, that they are able to quickly reinforce areas of study that need attention because the teacher-to-student ratio is 1-to-1. They'll also likely notice that the way their children have been taught math and reading is backwards, wrong-headed. It's a difficult journey, but once they are able to break through to their pupils, the reward is breathtaking. They can see their child blossoming in front of their eyes. This leaves them with one question. If I can keep this up, why would I ever send them back? So, what is a scared academic to do when he feels his power slipping through his fingers? Well, they have such a high regard for the state, why not bring them in to help? And by help, I mean to use their guns to force you to comply with their educational edicts. This is what Rand called the alliance of Attila and the witch doctors, and she couldn't have been more right. Harvard is holding a conference, link in the show notes, co-hosted by none other than our very own Jimmy Dwyer. I wonder what his opinion is on homeschooling. Ah, hell, let's just read the description off the webpage of this supposed hall of education. Quote, We will convene leaders in education and child welfare policy, legislators and legislative staff, academics and policy advocates to discuss child rights in connection with homeschooling in the United States. The focus will be on problems of educational deprivation and child maltreatment that too often occur under the guise of homeschooling in a legal environment of minimal or no oversight. Experts will lead conversations about the available empirical evidence, the current regulatory environment, proposals for legal reform, and strategies for effecting such reform. This event is private and by invitation only. Now, let me translate that for you. Quote, "We will bring in enforcers and convince them that homeschooling is abuse. We will advocate for the use of force to either compel these children into state-run school or to place so many restrictions on homeschooling that parents will just give up and send them in voluntarily. This event is private, so if you have a dissenting opinion, keep it to yourself." Now, I did say he was co-hosting, so maybe the other host is more reasonable. Let's see, one Elizabeth Bartholet, professor of law and faculty director of the Child Advocacy Program at Harvard Law School. She was recently interviewed by Harvard Magazine, so let's get it straight from the horse's mouth, eh? Quote, "Elizabeth Bartholet sees risks for children and society in homeschooling and recommends a presumptive ban on the practice. Homeschooling, she says, not only violates children's right to a meaningful education and their right to be protected from potential child abuse, but may keep them from contributing positively to a democratic society." Yeah, I'm going to stop you right there. There is no such thing as a right to an education. While I believe that it is morally imperative that as a parent you provide your child with an education, one cannot claim as a right the work of another man. That is called slavery. Someone has to produce a service, in this case, pedagogy, before you can consume it. Furthermore, while some people do indeed abuse their children, that is a separate issue from homeschooling. The state can and should investigate and end any instances of child abuse, but that does not then translate to your child must sit in our institutional learning facilities for 7 hours a day, and I don't give a shit about my kid contributing positively to a democratic society. First of all, we live in a republic, dumbass, and secondly, if my kid wants to go live in the woods off the grid after he turns 18, more power to him. At least you won't have to record podcasts about crazy people trying to dissolve his liberties. Quote, "She notes that parents choose homeschooling for an array of reasons. Some find local schools lacking or want to protect their child from bullying. Others do it to give their children the flexibility to pursue sports or other activities at a high level. But surveys of homeschoolers show that a majority of such families, by some estimates up to 90%, are driven by conservative Christian beliefs and seek to remove their children from mainstream culture. Bartholet notes that some of these parents are extreme religious ideologues who question science and promote female subservience and white supremacy." Female subservience and white supremacy? Give me a fucking break with this bullshit parade of ghouls. And conservative Christian beliefs. Oh, real scary stuff. You don't like that some people might think differently? Well, that makes you a bigot and a hypocrite, you moron. I'm an atheist and I homeschool my kids, so I get a fucking medal, or do I just get overlooked as an inconvenient statistic? Quote, "Children should grow up exposed to democratic values, ideas about non-discrimination, and tolerance of other people's viewpoints." Yeah, as long as they aren't Episcopalian, perish the thought. Quote, "She concedes that in some situations, homeschooling may be justified and effective. No doubt there are some parents who are motivated and capable of giving an education that's of a higher quality and broader scope as what's happening in the public school." Well, that's not really a high bar. Maybe someday I'll bring in the statistics about sexual abuse, failure rates, corruption, and bullying in public schools, but today I'm focusing on rights. Quote, "But Bartholet believes that if parents want permission to opt out of schools, the burden of proving that their case is justified should fall on the parents." There it is. Your child belongs to the state. If you want to take responsibility for their children, you must be this tall to ride. Quote, "I think an overwhelming majority of legislatures and American people, if they looked at the situation, would conclude that something ought to be done. Who gives a shit? If 90% of people who polled thought that we should reinstitute slavery, would she be on board? It's cowardly to stand behind the shield of popular opinion. Either state your wrong fucking opinion and be rightly criticized, or shut your mouth." Tom Bowden wrote an article in 2008 when California, surprise, surprise, Supreme Court ruled homeschooling illegal. He had this to say, quote, "For their part, defenders of public schooling can be expected to stay busy, papering over their system's own failures, the very failures that helped fuel the homeschooling movement, by driving desperate parents to seek refuge at home from the irrationality, violence, and mediocrity that have come to characterize government education in California and elsewhere. For now, at least, the battle lines are clearly drawn. Are parents mere drudges whose social duty it is to feed and house their spawn between mandatory indoctrination sessions at government-approved schools, or are they sovereign individuals whose right to guide their children's development the state may not infringe?" If you were shown images of a cat pulling the claws out of its kitten's paws, or a bird removing the wings from its chicks, you would rightly recoil in horror. Claws and wings are those creatures' means of survival. They are dooming their children. Why, then, would you stand idly by while your child is handed to the destroyers of the mind? The mind, reason, is man's means of survival, but it does not act automatically. It must be nurtured, fed, information taught, the best methods to discover truth. When your children are surrounded by teachers telling them there is no truth, just my truth and your truth, that logic is a tool used by the white patriarchy, they should try other methods like meditation and feeling to know what's right. Why do you not scream? I'll tell you this. The Cold War ain't over, folks, and we are losing by a mile. This fight isn't settled via submarine warfare, missile crises, or even the business end of a gun. This fight is in the minds of our children. The fight has been raging for the better part of a century, and vanishingly few people have even seen it. The battlefield is the universities, where our impressionable young minds go seeking an education and are instead force-fed drivel, postmodernism, critical race theory, subjectivism, and socialism. Do you remember that righteous fury that we felt at the beginning? The one that we used as a lens to focus our awareness on these scum? Now is the time to let it out. Say it with me now. Keep your fucking hands off my child's mind. Got a topic or feedback? Reach out on Twitter. The podcast is at @AmericanitisTech. That's the @ American, ITISTEK. You can also follow me at @Dan_Sagner, and my last name is spelled Sierra Alpha Golf November Echo Romeo. Please subscribe via Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts. A podcast is your thing. I'm also on YouTube, so remember to subscribe there. Patronize us at patreon.com/TechSide. Show notes are at techside.net/Americanitis. Theme music is by Eddie. I thank you all for listening. Later days.